Orchids have long captured the eye of humanity. Charles Darwin himself wrote one of the most famous texts in the history of biology on them and their pollination strategies, on the various contrivances by which British and foreign orchids are fertilized by insects and to the good effects of intercrossing. A bit of a mouthful, but orchids in their magnificence did quite literally drive Europeans of the time insane. A disease known as orchid delirium drove wealthy collectors to amass vast gardens and herbaria, often resulting in the deaths of the plants. In any case, orchids are a fascinating and diverse group of plants and account for what is, by far, the largest plant family by total number of recognized species in the world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In New England, especially the more populated regions in the southeast, one orchid seems to reign supreme, long capturing the admiring gaze of those venturing into the woods in late spring. Cypripedium accal, the pink lady's slipper, is both the most frequently encountered and one of the most beautiful orchids in the region. Cypripedium accal has an impressive range and is a large, showy flower. It's actually one of the most accurately documented species of orchid in the United States and Canada. Present and prolific in certain areas of its range, it is notoriously rare in other pockets. Favoring thin, leached, acidic soils, we see it does well in the southeast corner of New England, the Appalachians, the Great Lakes, but can be completely absent in areas with more basic, nutrient-rich, sedimentary soils, such as the Great Plains, portions of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and pockets of New York State and northwestern New England. A staple species of dry and mesic oak and pine woodlands, it is found frequently under the shade of eastern white pine, Pinus strobus, as well as northern woodland oaks such as red oak, Quercus aruba, and white oak, Quercus alba, as well as other oak relatives such as Fagus grandifolia, the American beech. Other species growing alongside Cypripedium accal include Mayanthemum canadense, the Canada mayflower, Lysomachia borealis, a primrose commonly called the starflower, Aurelia nudicalis, a fascinating relative of ginseng, frequently called wild sarsaparilla, various species of viburnum. For example, here we have Viburnum acerifolium, the maple leaf viburnum, in bud. And of course, prolific amounts of Toxicodendron radicans, eastern poison ivy. It's worth note, though, that this species does do well in other habitats, such as the more moist montane regions, blooming prolifically in the mixed conifer deciduous forests of the White Mountains, and it can also occasionally be seen on the edges, but not typically within bogs and fens. Orchid anatomy interest is largely focused on floral anatomy, but Cypripedium accal does sport a set of very distinctive basal leaves, making the plant easy to spot even when not in bloom. The stems and fruits also tend to be quite persistent even after the flower has withered. True to the species epithet, accal, Cypripedium accal does not have cauline leaves, which are simply leaves on the stem. The inflorescence is large and conspicuous, ranging from light pink to nearly ruby red. It stands out brightly in the forest. A white form is also known from some regions and is especially abundant in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The ovary is inferior, presenting behind the perianth, and is subtended by a single bract, not uncommon in some orchid subfamilies. More on that in a bit. The flower itself is highly modified, one of the key hallmarks of orchids. The large and most noticeable feature is the labellum, a term for the highly modified lower petal on an orchid. In Cypripedium accal, these have evolved into pouches that temporarily trap pollinators and force them to exit in such a way that they will come in contact with the anther, located here. The lateral petals are on either side and are not nearly as showy as the labellum. While it appears that there are only two sepals, the two lateral sepals are fused and hang below the flower. The dorsal sepal is on top and does a somewhat okay job of hiding the 2 anthers, and a third sterile anther, technically a stamen, that has been rendered sterile and modified into what is known as a staminode. For those of you following along at home, that's 3 modified petals, 3 modified sepals, and 3 modified stamens, the hallmarks of a monocot. The stigma is typically out of view and underneath the staminode. The sum of all these reproductive parts combined is known as the column and is another key feature in orchid morphology. While most hope to catch this plant in bloom in New England late May and early June, it is beautiful and fascinating, even in bud. As mentioned earlier, the orchid family, Orchidaceae, is the single largest family of plants in terms of total number of described species. Over 28,000 species and nearly 800 genera make up this widespread and diverse family. From equatorial tropical rainforests to near polar tundra, orchids are found on every continent except Antarctica, and in nearly every habitat type, essentially absent only from glaciers and ice caps. Even within the confines of the Northeast, dozens of species and forms are present. While I can, and definitely should, at some point, do a general video on the over 60 species of orchids found in the Northeast, for now it is my task to focus on Cypripedium McCall, as it's a bit special compared to most orchids. Many large plant families are broken up into subfamilies, tribes, subtribes, etc. Cypripedium McCall finds itself placed in one of the more primitive subfamilies of orchid, the Cypripedioideae subfamily. While there are tens of thousands of species of orchid, mostly belonging to the subfamilies Orchidoideae, and especially to the subfamily Epidendroideae, a meager 165 species find themselves in the Cypripedioideae subfamily, all having the characteristic pouch, and all being unusual in the retention of true anthers, as a vast majority of orchids have modified their pollen-presenting organs into a sticky sac known as a pollinia. While we had the chance to see a number of New England orchid species while speaking about the orchid family broadly, Cypripedium McCall is not the only species of lady slipper in New England. Its closest cousins in the family include other species of Cypripedium, such as the yellow lady slipper, Cypripedium parviflorum, a common and widespread species, much more fond of basic sedimentary soil types, often a more common species when Cypripedium McCall is rare, and 2 other species, Cypripedium arietinum, the very rare and diminutive ram's head lady slipper, and Cypripedium reginae, the showy lady slipper, a lovely species that has a restricted range within New England, but is much more common around the Great Lakes. Cypripedium McCall, like many orchids, is threatened by collection. It cannot generally be cultivated and will not tolerate transplant. Despite being a species of least concern in all states in New England, it is typically protected and should be admired and photographed, but never picked or dug up. Cypripedium McCall, like all orchids, is heavily dependent on a highly specialized and fragile symbiosis with fungi in the ground. Severe disturbance breaks this connection and results in the death of the plant in most scenarios. Regardless, it is perhaps for the best that it lacks any commercial uses. The state wildflower of New Hampshire, it is one of the most well-known native plants of the region and an iconic beauty of the Northeast. The pink lady slipper is a flower that holds a place in the hearts of many New Englanders already, but I hope I've introduced at least one viewer to a spring marvel potentially as close to you as your local nature preserve or even a wooded backyard. If this species is a familiar face, I hope you learned something new. The pink lady slipper was the first truly native plant I had a name and an eye for, long before I spent hours, if not days, tramping around the woodlands, grasslands, mountains, and wetlands of New England making content for you all. Back then, I was just a child, enraptured by the beauty of this plant, something akin to a first love. I hope the pink lady slipper leaves a lasting impression on you as well. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.